Here's something I want you to sit with for a second. You've probably done some kind of work on yourself, right? Maybe you've read the books, gone to therapy, listened to the podcasts, including this one, and you've noticed some things about yourself. Maybe you've had real breakthroughs, moments where something genuinely shifted and you thought, all right, okay, I'm getting somewhere. And then a few weeks later, you're back in the same pattern, attracting the same type of person with the same dynamic. You notice you're the same version of yourself that you were trying to leave behind, and you can't figure out why the hell it keeps happening. Sure, there may have been a lack of effort or a lack of insight, but what if it was something deeper? Something that was never about your dating strategies or your communication skills or your profile, but about the identity that you've been living inside of, possibly for your entire adult life. That is what we are talking about today. Welcome back to Stripped, Drop Your Patterns. I'm Rachel J., your host and transformational dating coach, and I am so glad you're here. If you're new, welcome. I am genuinely happy that you found this. And if you've been rolling with me for a while, you know that this is a space where we get real, we go deep, and we do it together. So let's get into it. Throw out the rules, forget the cliches. This isn't about the perfect profile or the perfect date. It's about real connection. It's time to strip away the masks, shed the stories, and drop those old patterns that no longer serve you. Tired of dating advice that doesn't fit? So are we. Welcome to Stripped, Drop Your Patterns, where conscious dating isn't about following a script. It's about embracing your whole self and attracting the kind of love that sets your soul on fire. I'm Rachel J., the connection coach and your host. Let's get real. This past week was the World Tapping Summit. And while I only caught a few of the sessions, one of them landed so hard for me. It was about identity, and specifically one line that the facilitator said that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. She said, "Our identity is what we created to survive our childhood." Wow, right? I flagged this for myself so that I could go back and journal on it when I had more time, and what came up for me is what I'm sharing with you today. So whatever identity you created to survive your childhood is basically your set point. Think about your home thermostat, right? You set it to 68 degrees, and no matter what happens, if you open the windows, you light a fire in the fireplace, the system will always work to return to 68. That's its job. That's what it was programmed to do. It doesn't care that you want it colder or warmer. It doesn't care that the conditions have changed. It just keeps pulling back to the set point because that is the instruction it was given. Well, your identity works the exact same way. You can do all kinds of personal growth work. You can read every book, journal every morning, go to therapy for years, listen to every podcast, this one included, and experience real, genuine movement. But if your identity hasn't been updated, you will always return to your set point. And it's not because you're weak, and it's not because the work wasn't real or your progress was phoned in, but because your nervous system is running a program that was installed a long time ago, and it is really fucking good at its job. This is why we often see diets and weight loss surgeries fail, right? Because while the person who is doing the diet or getting the weight loss surgery or taking the injections, let's say, the newer technology, has the intention of losing the weight, their nervous system doesn't feel that it is safe to be that less heavy version of themselves or that thinner version of themselves. And so what we often see is that a really intense period of dieting can be followed up with putting all that weight back on and more. Or after having a weight loss surgery, the weight comes right back on. It doesn't last. And that, again, is an example of the nervous system returning to its set point. And that's why this one line landed for me like a ton of bricks. Our identity is what we created to survive our childhood. So I just want to let that sit for a second, because when I heard it, something in me went very quiet. And not in a sad way, but more so in a, oh my God, that's it kind of a way. In the way that a really true thing lands when you finally hear it named out loud. Just think about what that means. The version of you that shows up in relationships, on dates, in the moments when something real is on the line. The version that monitors what it says or keeps people at a certain distance or works incredibly hard to come across a certain way. That version wasn't born, quote unquote, broken, as we sometimes diagnose ourselves. It wasn't a mistake. It was invented by a child who was doing the most intelligent thing available to them at the time, figuring out what they needed to be in order to stay safe, stay loved, and stay connected in a world that they didn't yet have the power to affect. It was brilliant. It was adaptive. It was creative problem solving by a child with limited options. And I want you to really hear that because I think it's one of the most de-shaming things that I've ever encountered in this work. Whatever your identity is doing that's getting in your way right now, the walls, the performance, the need to get it right, the shrinking, the overcompensating, it wasn't a flaw. It was a solution, a creative, resourceful, deeply human solution invented by a version of you that was honestly just trying to make it through. But here's the thing about childhood survival strategies. They were built for a world that no longer exists. The child who needed that identity was operating with the tools, the power, and the understanding available to a child. But you are not that child anymore. You have resources now that child could never have imagined. You have agency and awareness and the ability to choose differently. And yet your nervous system, your identity, your set point is still running the same program, still responding to present-day situations with the emotional wiring of someone who needed to survive something that ended a long time ago. So the problem isn't that you built such a solution. The problem is that you're still living it. You're still set to 68 degrees in a life that is asking you to run hotter. I want to share something personal here because examples are helpful always, and I think it's going to land differently when you know that this is coming from my own life and not just a theory. And I'll be honest, it's going to get a bit vulnerable for me, but that's what we're here for, right? I got to walk the walk if I'm going to talk the talk. So in this particular session of the Tapping Summit, the facilitator was speaking about how the survival identities we built as kids play out in our adult lives. And for me, two things come up really clearly. The first was people pleasing and this deep, persistent need to feel enough, whatever that is. And I can trace that directly back to my relationship with my mom. Wanting to stay on her good side, learning early that there were things I couldn't fully express to her, feelings I had to manage or soften or stuff altogether. When you're a kid and one of your most important relationships requires you to be a certain way in order to keep that relationship safe, you learn to perform that way. You get really, really good at it. And then one day you're an adult and you're doing it in every relationship you have, and you genuinely don't understand why you feel so unseen and the relationship feels hollow. The second piece was this. My biological father had a mental illness, and because of that, my mom worked hard to protect me. She really did. But the way that she protected me was by making me hyper-vigilant about the information that I shared with him when I did see him. There were things that I was never supposed to say to him, details about my life that I couldn't let slip, like where we lived, where I went to school, what car we drove, because my mom was deathly afraid that during one of his episodes, he might try to abduct me. I would spend the whole ride going to see him in a state of preparation and rote memorization of slightly altered details that were close enough to the truth that they were realistic and disguised enough to protect my safety. And then the whole visit, anxiously on edge. And so as a very young child, my nervous system learned something that it never should have had to learn, that saying the wrong thing could have very real, very dangerous consequences. So the code my operating system has been running for the past 40 years has been saying the wrong thing equals danger, abort. Now, can you imagine carrying that around for decades without realizing it? And so obviously this showed up in my relationships, which I'll get into a little bit more in a second, but it also showed up for me in other ways, which I want to share with you because sometimes we don't realize all the ways that our old wiring can be really insidiously showing up and running the show in ways that we don't even connect it to. So one of the ways it showed up for me was in school. I was always terrified to be called on in class, even when I knew the answer, because of those anxious feelings that would rise up and make me afraid of saying the wrong thing. It showed up professionally. I would massively over-prepare for anything, and I mean anything, because my nervous system equated being underprepared with real physical risk. It showed up anytime there was a conflict in every kind of relationship that I had, because I was terrified of the other person being mad at me, and so I would stuff my own feelings. And it absolutely showed up in my identity around enoughness, right? Because if my worth was tied to saying and doing the right things, then every mistake became evidence that I wasn't enough. Every imperfection was a threat. That's the identity that I had been living inside of, built to survive, not built to be fully, freely, confidently me. And maybe as you're listening to this right now, something in you is quietly going, yeah, I know that feeling. So I just shared my version of this, and I just want to pause here and say, yours might look completely different on the surface, and I still want you to recognize it, because here's what I also want to name. Survival identities aren't only built in dramatic or obviously difficult circumstances. They get built in the subtlest of conditions as well. Maybe your household wasn't unsafe, but maybe one of your parents was emotionally unavailable, and so you learned to need less, to ask for less, to perform self-sufficiency as a way of staying lovable. Maybe your peer group growing up punished sensitivity, and so you learned to be funny instead of feeling, to be impressive instead of vulnerable. Maybe nothing overtly difficult happened, and yet somewhere along the way you received the message, quietly and repeatedly, that the full, unedited version of you was a little too much, or not quite enough, and so you made adjustments. You adapted. You survived. And that adaptation became your identity, and your identity became your thermostat. And now, no matter how much insight you accumulate, no matter how much you want things to be different, you keep returning to the same set point, because that is what the system was built to do. So when it comes to dating, and I want to be really specific here because this is where I see it show up most consistently in the men that I work with, that survival identity often looks like this. You're interested in someone, like genuinely interested, and suddenly there's this low hum of pressure underneath everything. You're monitoring what you say, you're editing yourself in real time, you walk away from a good date and spend the next 2 hours replaying it, cataloging what landed and what didn't, waiting for evidence of whether you did it right. Physically, you might be feeling a pit in your stomach or a tightness in your chest, muscle tension or sweating. This is a typical fight or flight response that your system is preparing for because it's coded to sense danger and the warning light is signaling. And the worst part is that the version of you that shows up in those moments, the monitored, managed, performance-ready version, is actually less attractive than the one that exists when you're relaxed and unguarded. But your nervous system doesn't know that. It only knows that being fully yourself once felt risky, and it is not about to let you forget that. Fear of rejection is one of the most common things I see in the men that I work with. And I want you to hear me clearly. That fear is not a character flaw. It is a nervous system response. It is your survival identity doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you. The question is, protect you from what exactly? Because the threat that created this protection mechanism isn't real anymore. But your set point doesn't know that yet. The reason our identity feels so sticky, the reason we keep defaulting back to our set point no matter how much work we do, is because of how our brains are literally wired. Every experience that you've had, every emotional response you've had on repeat has carved the neural pathways in your brain. And the pathways that have been firing for 20, 30, 40 years, well, they are wide, well-paved highways by now. They are the default route your brain takes because it is the fastest, most efficient path available. This is why we return to habits or people who we know are bad for us, right? It's their familiarity that wins out over the discomfort that they cause us. New patterns, by contrast, are like hiking trails in tall grass. They exist, but they are narrow, and they require you to consciously choose them again and again and again before they start to become the natural new route. This is neuroplasticity. the brain's ability to rewire, to build new pathways, to literally change. And the good news is that it is absolutely real and absolutely possible. Now, the less sexy news is that it takes time and consistent practice to build those new pathways. You're not going to undo 30 years of patterning in a weekend retreat. A single breakthrough, even a powerful one, is the beginning. It's the moment that you discover the new trail exists. Actually clearing it, widening it, making it your default route, that is a practice. That is something you commit to day after day with patience and without shame. I think about it like upgrading your hardware, right? You can download all the new software you want, the insights, the frameworks, the strategies, but if the hardware is still running on the old operating system, the software isn't going to function the way it was designed to. The hardware upgrade is the identity work, and it is some of the most important work that you will ever do. So, what did I actually do with all of this? After I journaled and identified the identity pieces that were coming up for me, I tapped on it. And you've heard of me talk about EFT, emotional freedom technique, or tapping in, a few previous episodes. But let me just give you a quick picture in case you are new here. So EFT is a practice where you use your fingertips to lightly tap on specific acupressure points on your body, like your face, your collarbone, the sides of your hand, while speaking out loud to whatever emotional charge or memory you're working with. I know it sounds a little unusual the first time you encounter it, but the science behind it is genuinely compelling. Tapping activates the body's parasympathetic nervous system, which sends a signal to your amygdala, which is the part of your brain responsible for the fear response, that you are safe. So you're doing this tapping on these acupressure points while holding the activating thought or memory in your awareness. So you're essentially teaching your nervous system that this thing that you're scared of is not going to kill you, that the threat isn't real anymore. And over time, the emotional charge attached to that memory or that pattern or belief begins to decrease. Think of it like pressing the reset button on your nervous system while staying present with the very thing that's been scaring you or triggering you. Over time, it essentially changes your nervous system's response to whatever the stressor was so that you no longer respond to that stressor in the same ways. Because let's face it, those stressors are going to continue to come up. But doing this tapping over time and changing those neural pathways will decrease the amount of activation you feel when that stressor pops up. It's super fascinating, and there are experts way more qualified than me to learn from about this. So I highly recommend looking into this for yourself as just another tool to add to your toolbox. So before I started tapping on this identity piece, I tuned in and intuitively gave myself a number between 0 to 10 to basically determine my baseline for how activated I felt before tapping. 0 is completely neutral, and then 10 is fully activated, flooded, at the limit. Well, I was at an 11. And I am not being dramatic. The number that came to mind when I tuned in was literally above the scale. And in the first part of the tapping, I was crying, saying the memories and emotions and that charge feeling because I was dropped into the childhood roots of this pattern. And so it brought more to the surface. The little kid in me who was so afraid of saying the wrong thing, who tied her worth to her performance, who needed so badly to be enough, she had a lot to say. And what you do after you tap on the charged emotion or memory or thought or stressor is you move from that place of where you're at when you start tapping into a place of where you want to be. That's what shifts the energy. That's what trains your system into safety, is by going through a full, complete cycle of where you're at to where you want to be. Well, after the tapping, I was then at a 6 when I tuned back in. Now, I want to say something about that because I think it's important. A 5-point shift on that scale in one session is actually quite significant. Even a single degree of movement matters. Like, think about a flight plan. If a plane changes course by just 1 degree at takeoff, it ends up in a completely different city by the time it lands. This is what we're doing here. We're not trying to be different overnight. We're just adjusting the trajectory 1 degree at a time. And then those degrees compound with practice. And I want to be transparent about this next part. This identity piece for me, the perfectionism, the fear of saying the wrong thing, the worth tied to performance, this actually came up for me several months ago in a session with my own coach, and I was floored. I was emotional. It was really jarring for me because something genuinely cracked open, and I thought, okay, I see it now. I've got this. This explains a lot. This buried part has been brought into the light, and okay, now I'm free. Wrong. Because here I was during the tapping summit and it came up again. Same root, different container. And I had to be honest with myself that one breakthrough wasn't enough. One session with my coach, one good cry, one moment of clarity and awareness, it didn't take the wall down. It just showed me where the wall was. This pattern is so deeply ingrained in me that it is going to require me to keep returning to it again and again with patience and without judgment or shame until the new pathway is wider than the old one. And I'm telling you that because I think it matters that you hear it from me, not just as a coach who facilitates your pattern breaking, but as someone who is genuinely in this work alongside you. The fact that something services more than once doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're finally going deep enough to find the real root, and that is something worth honoring and being really, really proud of. What I tapped on at the core was this. I am safe to make mistakes. I am safe to say the wrong thing. I am still loved, still worthy, still deserving of everything I desire. Not because I got it right every time, and not because I performed perfectly, but simply because I exist. I am enough as I am, flaws and fuck-ups and all. And I want to offer that to you right now, even if it doesn't fully land yet. Even if part of you is reading your own performance metrics as proof of your value. Even if every time you get rejected, some part of you files it away as evidence that you're not enough. You are enough. Your worth is not a function of your output. It is not contingent on your performance in a conversation, on a date, in a relationship. It is inherent. Your value just is. The work is building the neural pathways that let you actually feel that, not just know it intellectually, but feel it in your body in the moments that count. Here's what I want you to walk away with today. The version of you that has been showing up in your relationships, the one that over-prepares, that monitors, that pulls back when things get real, shrinks a little when the stakes feel high, that version of you was built with love, built by a kid who was just trying to stay safe and connected in a world that was sometimes unpredictable. That identity served its purpose when it was needed, and now it's asking to be updated, not deleted, not shamed, simply updated. The one who is available to the kind of love that actually lasts, the kind that sets your soul on fire, the kind where you can finally stop performing and just be and be loved for being you. That person lives on the other side of this identity work. They're not a different person. They're you with a hardware upgrade. They're you with wider, clearer pathways to their own heart. And tuning that radio dial, my friend, starts right here, right now, with the willingness to look at what you've built, honor why you built it, and begin 1 degree at a time to build something new. And speaking of building something new, I'm so excited to tell you that enrollment for Magnetic, my handheld app that contains the Magnetism Mastery System, is opening again soon. And it is designed specifically for this kind of work. Not therapy, not a dating strategy course, a neuroplasticity-informed, self-guided experience that walks you through identifying your patterns, understanding where they came from, and genuinely rewiring your dating identity from the inside out. It is the hardware upgrade packaged in a way that fits your life and your pace. We're building the founding member waitlist right now, and I would love for you to be on it. Founding members get early access, special pricing, and the chance to shape the experience as it evolves. The link is in the show notes. I invite you to go check it out, add your name, and take that first step toward the version of you that is ready for real, lasting love. Thank you so much for being here today. If this episode moved you, if something in it resonated, I would genuinely love to hear from you. Leave a review, send me a message, share it with someone who needs it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps the podcast to grow and reach more people who are ready to drop their patterns just like you. You're doing really profound work, and I am so happy you're here. Bye for now.